Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight's program. My name is Lauren Gilbert. I'm the Senior Manager for Public Services at the Center for Jewish History. And we are pleased to be co-sponsoring this event with the Jewish Week and 70 Faces Media. And I'd like to thank Thea Wieseltier, Director of Strategic Projects and Public Programs at 70 Faces Media, for helping to put this program together. I will introduce the moderator, Sandy Borowski, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sandy to present the rest of the panelists. First, I just want to point out that the chat is turned off for participants, so please put your questions in the Q&A box, and they will get to your questions at the end, but you can put them in as we go along. Also, this program is being recorded and will be available on the center's webpage and YouTube page within a few weeks. And if you registered for the program, you'll get a link in your email to the recording. All right, so let's get started. Sandy Borowski is an award-winning journalist, editor, and author of several books, most recently 212 Views of Central Park. She was the longtime culture editor of the Jewish Week. All right, thank you very much, Sandy. I will turn my camera off and you can all get started.
Great, thank you so much, Lauren. Good evening and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So before we begin, I want to thank Lauren Gilbert of the Center for Jewish History and my friend and colleague Thea Wieseltier of the Jewish Week and 70 Faces Media for helping to arrange and host this evening's event, a tribute to the memory of Dr. William Helmreich. Willie, or Bill, was a sociologist, a scholar of Judaism, a distinguished professor, and to borrow Alfred Kazan's title, a walker in the city. He pounded the pavement of every block of this great city, wearing out many pairs of Rockports. And he was a beloved husband, father, friend, and generous mentor to many who are present. Tonight, we'd like to remember and celebrate his many accomplishments, the amazing curiosity, vitality, and compassion which drew him to so many different people and experiences, his buoyant spirit, and his wide open heart. You'll see all of that in the purposeful and joyful way he walked, which we'll have the opportunity to witness in just a few minutes. The format for tonight's program is that I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists, and then we'll watch a clip of Willie on CBS Sunday Morning. After that, we'll have a conversation and we'll leave time for your questions. Feel free at any time to send us your questions and comments through the Q&A function on your screen. So on to our panelists. Jeff Helmreich, the son of William and Helene Helmreich, is Associate Professor of Philosophy and Law at the University of California, Irvine, where he also directs the Center for Legal Philosophy. Previously, he was a research fellow at Harvard Law School. Before entering academia, Jeff worked in journalism and Middle East diplomacy. He says that most formatively, when he was a junior in high school, he and his father and brother walked Yam Liyam in Israel, from the Mediterranean to the Sea of Galilee, previewing the sorts of strolls they would later take together through Jerusalem, Gaza, LA, and especially New York City. So Jeff joins us from his home in Southern California. Jeffrey Gurock is the Libby M. Klaperman Professor of Jewish History at the Bernard Revel Graduate School of Jewish Studies of Yeshiva University. He's the award-winning author or editor of 23 books, including A Modern Heretic and a Traditional Community, Mordechai Kaplan, Orthodoxy and American Judaism, and Jews in Gotham, New York Jews in a Changing City, also The Jews of Harlem, and most recently, Parkchester, A Bronx Tale of Race and Ethnicity. He's an elected fellow of the American Academy of Jewish Research and the New York Academy of History. He's joining us from his home in Riverdale. Matt Green is walking every block of New York City, as documented in the wonderful film, The World Before Your Feet, and Willie has a cameo in that film. Matt is a former civil engineer who quit his job in 2010 to walk across the United States, pushing his gear in a handmade cart and knocking on strangers' doors, asking for places to camp. He made his way from Rockaway Beach, New York to Rockaway Beach, Oregon. Since 2012, he's been walking every block of every street in the 5 boroughs of New York City, a journey of more than 9,000 miles, photographing and researching whatever catches his eye as he roams from one neighborhood to the next. He's joining us during a visit to Chicago. My own connection to Willie was as a friend and colleague and fellow walker. I had heard of him, but I think we first met in June 2000 when I published an article in the New York Times about the Bowery, where my dad had a business. It turned out that Willie's uncle owned a bar down the block, and he wanted to talk about the Bowery then and now. He just knew so much. In fact, in the 1960s, he did a story about homeless people on the Bowery for a magazine he founded with some college buddies, interviewing people who stayed in the $1 a night hotels with names like the Majestic and the Palace. He said that was how his career as a sociologist began. So we stayed in touch, and in 2013, when his book, The New York Nobody Knows, was published, I spent a day walking around the Bronx, Manhattan, and Brooklyn with him for an article in the New York Jewish Week. He drove us between boroughs with the skill of the cab driver he had once been. I thought that I knew the city well, but he showed me parts I had never seen. On the streets, he noticed all the small and large details and spoke to everyone. I like to say that Willie never met a stranger. So the segment we are about to view ran on CBS Sunday Morning in May 2016. I want to thank the producer, Ashley Velli of CBS, for giving us permission to show this. She told me that she loved producing the piece. So can we have the video, please?
It's amazing how quickly it all adds up. And then
What did it add up to in the end?
6,048 miles.
6,048 miles.
That is like walking to Los Angeles and back as the crow flies, and then another 971 miles to St. Louis. It was really a long walk.
It had to be if his mission was to write a book called The New York Nobody Knows.
It's part of a preserve here.
He took his first steps near the city's outer border in Queens. He must have worn out a few pairs of shoes.
9.
9.
Look, it's 30 miles a week, 120 a month, 1,500 a year, and in 4 years you're at 6,000.
This is Aurora Pond. A professor of sociology at City College, the 70-year-old Helmreich walked almost every street, nearly 125,000 blocks, from the best known, like Times Square in Manhattan, to the most remote. Yes, deep in the Bronx, New York, has a waterfall. The idea for Helmreich's book came from a game he played as a boy. His father called it Last Stop. They'd hop the subway near their Manhattan apartment and ride it till the end of the line, then wander the city from there.
After we ran out of the last stop, we go to the second to last stop, and then we go to the third last stop, and each time it was totally different.
For 4 years, through all 4 seasons, in all kinds of weather, Helmreich systematically walked the city, taking notes as he went about the places he saw and the people he met.
If I could say anything about this city that sums it up, is that it's the greatest outdoor museum in the world. It's a whole discovery.
In an industrial neighborhood in Bushwick, Brooklyn, he stumbled on this art alley, an open-air explosion of expression.
When you walk every block in New York, you stumble upon things you would have never stumbled upon before. I couldn't believe that there was this fantastic place here filled with all sorts of murals.
More than 100 of them. He met local restaurant owner James Lawrence, who explained how it started.
We just wanted to do something to start improving the look of the area. And as soon as we put up a few murals along this one wall, it just kind of took off, and we started getting permission from more and more landlords, and artists started showing up on the new murals, and it's really just kind of grown out of control.
All of this has happened in what, about 3 years?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. pretty crazy.
Further into Brooklyn, in Bensonhurst, on an otherwise quiet street, he found this inviting yard filled with superheroes and villains, pop icons and starlets, an homage to nostalgia known as Steve's Playland. This is Steve's Playland, and this is Steve.
How are you?
How are you, Steve?
How are you? Hey, Steve. How you doing?
How long have you had this place, Steve?
Going on 14 years now.
And what's the idea behind all this? What do you?
Well, originally it started out just for me personally to bring back a lot of my childhood memories. I tried to bring it back to me physically in this garage. So when I go in there, it sets me back in time.
Steve Campanilla's personal playland is open to anyone who happens to stop by. You must have sunk a small fortune into this, Steve.
I did, but I don't think of it monetarily. This is strictly for my personal pleasure. I get a lot of joy out of doing it, and I get a lot of joy out of coming in here and just gazing now and then.
In the middle of the Bronx, Helmreich learned about this church where exorcisms were once performed. This is the bike shop.
This is a special bike shop because it's run by a man who's sort of a doctor of bicycles.
I can actually feel his wheels touching the rubbers.
In Harlem, he found Donald Childs, who diagnoses a bicycle's problems with his fingers or a stethoscope.
You know, I always wanted to be a doctor, but I never thought I was going to be a doctor in bike. Everywhere I go, people are, hey, doctor.
And out in the St. Albans neighborhood of Queens, he wandered through a lost center of Black culture. So all these people live here.
Yes, they all live here. Ella Fitzgerald, Lena Horne, John Coltrane.
That's Waller, James Brown. And it was because of this line, really?
In large part, this took them right into New York City, and then it was an easy hop to the Savoy, to the Roseland, where they performed.
It's an incredible concentration of talent in one area.
It really is.
When Helmreich had finally exhausted every corner of New York City,
I ended up here.
he came to the end of the road in Greenpoint, Brooklyn.
This was mile 6048. And I approached it feeling, I wouldn't say relief, I felt exuberance. And when I looked to the left and I saw the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building and all the iconic structures of New York City of Manhattan, I felt this was a very, very fitting place to end the journey.
But the New York Nobody Knows has proved so popular, Bill Helmreich has been commissioned to write separate guides for each of the city's 5 boroughs. So he's off again on another journey that he expects will keep him walking for another decade.
Wow, it's a wonderful piece. It's great to see his step again, but he still had so many more miles left to walk. So I thought I'd begin by asking you each about your own connection to Willie, how you got to know him. Jeff, I want to start with you, but I think the question will be a little bit different for you. I think you need to unmute. And I'm hoping that you can tell us a bit about your dad's background and his early life. Thanks.
Sure. Before that, I just want to thank the Center for Jewish History, Sandy, and my co-panelists for this very important, I think, fitting tribute to my father. He, as was mentioned, he actually came to this country, like so many people he studied, as an immigrant. He was a baby. He came here with his parents who had just fled the Holocaust. In fact, he grew up in Upper Manhattan, speaking only German and a little bit of Yiddish and Flemish for the first almost 6 years of his life, before he realized that those weren't the languages here. So he too had a sense of coming here from somewhere else. And he particularly became very close with his father from an early age, close with both of his parents, but his father used to, as the segment showed, he used to take him around to the far reaches of New York. And although his father was different from him, his father was a quieter man, a little bit more reserved, but he shared with my father both fearlessness and this sense of being at home anywhere. There was no place where he didn't feel as though he belonged, as though he was at home. There was no fish out of water sense for Grandpa. And Grandpa, I think, shared this with my father. And in both that sense of belonging and in his intrepid adventurousness, I think he imparted certain things to my father that he took with him. One of them was this feeling that to get to know a place, to explore a place, you really have to go. And it was more than that. To know things in general, to get knowledge, you had to move. You didn't just sit at a desk. You didn't just sit and think. You really had to go out. To learn, you had to walk, you had to move, you had to talk. It was not a passive process. We took that from Grandpa to some extent. And even more than that, I think from the way Grandpa was, the way he embraced life, the way he embraced his new land, the way he was at home everywhere, was paradoxical because he had not only survived the Holocaust and been uprooted completely and lost almost all of his family, but Grandpa had in particular fled as a refugee from place to place, one step ahead of the Nazis, being overturned, being discovered, kicked out of wherever it was that he was hiding. The idea that this person would suddenly completely embrace this new homeland, completely take it by storm, I think taught my father this idea that there are no real boundaries, that you can transcend where you came from, you can transcend what happened to you, you can transcend a particular context and culture that you're from. And this, I think these two ideas of being at home everywhere and of going out and discovering things at the same time of transcending any of the sort of barriers that would normally divide people, I think really carried him as a world capturer and boundary breaker, I think, throughout his life, throughout his career, and infused almost everything that he did ever since his early childhood.
Thank you. Matt, how about you? How did you first encounter Willie?
Well, so I had been doing this walking every block in the city for getting close to 2 years, I think it was, before I kind of heard rumblings of this, this other guy who had, was just finishing up doing the same thing, publishing a book about it. And it was funny because I was kind of equal parts surprised that someone else had, decided to dedicate years of their life to doing this thing. And at the same time, I was just kind of validated, I think, because part of me was wondering why way more people weren't doing this. Like, it seemed like the best idea in the world to me. And so to know that somebody else out there had, just taken it upon themselves for no real reason other than curiosity about the city and the people who live there, to devote so much of their life to this thing. It was a very validating feeling, and also it was just this. I don't know. I've obviously felt this deep connection to him. We never, spent a ton of time together over the years, but there was just this kind of underlying connection we had that made me feel really close to him in a lot of ways, and feel like there was kind of some unspoken understanding between us. And I think that, you summed him up so well, saying, his buoyant spirit and his wide open heart. And those were the kind of things that were just immediately apparent to me when we first met. We actually met on screen for the first time for a little video that the New Yorker magazine was doing about our two walks. And so, within minutes of meeting him, we were walking around, and this guy was just, walking his dog, and wasn't thrilled to see a camera there recording things. And just, we both said hello to him, and he just kind of grumbled at us. And I just remember that Bill, I could just see in his head, it was like, this is the great challenge of the day. Like, I'm going to get this guy to smile at me, and I'm going to make friends with this guy. And I could just see in that moment, within minutes of meeting him, who he was, and that wide open heart you were talking about. And that, really he just had this mission to connect with everybody he crossed paths with in the city.
And do you agree that walking is the best way to get to know a city?
Yeah, of course, of course. I mean, you're kind of, you're embedded in the place where you are. You're not surrounded by a car, you're not zooming by at some high speed. You're really physically in a place and yet you're in motion and you're kind of seeing the city and you're seeing stories of the city as you move through it. And yet you're right there in the middle of it all with everybody around you. And I also love the phrase he used, that the city's the world's greatest outdoor museum.
Museum.
Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you. Jeff, how about you? I know you're academic colleagues and friends. I wonder how you first met Willie.
Well, I have a unique bonding experience with Willie Helmreich. Every time I ran into Willie, he would tell the story of our relationship to City College of New York, which was my alma mater. And the story goes back to, by the way, the Helmreich family has a somewhat different version of the story that I'm going to tell, but this is my version. In 1978, we were both starting our careers. I was at Yeshiva. He was at City College. And this was an era where City College was changing in terms of its ethnic composition, its racial composition. And Willie was teaching sociology at City, and most of his students were African Americans. And he was very comfortable teaching them. As Jeff Helmreich pointed out, he grew up in the pre-gentrified Upper West Side of Manhattan in a mixed neighborhood. And he had written a dissertation about a Black radical group, got his PhD from Washington University of St. Louis. And he was very comfortable teaching at City College. At the same time, there was the head of the African American Studies program named Leonard Jeffries. And Jeffries and others at City College decided they were going to have a symposium on the history of Harlem, past, present, and future. Now, I had just written my first book called When Harlem Was Jewish, and somehow Willie found a way to get me invited to the event. Actually, the guest star of the presentation was not me, but Roy Innes, the head of CORE. Anyway, so I gave a presentation to an audience who was not exactly favorably disposed towards me, particularly when I talked about the transformation of Harlem from being a Jewish neighborhood to a Black neighborhood. And I used the code word, I said real estate, and there was some boos came from the audience. And there's some sneers. Actually, the crowd was more angry at Roy Innes than it was at me because he was being a Black conservative challenge to students. Anyway, when the symposium was almost over, it was time to leave. Two very large bodyguards came up and escorted me out of the auditorium to the safety of Amsterdam Avenue. I thought about this event so many times because Willie mentioned it so many times. And I realized, why did he invite me here? It wasn't because he wanted to tell a Jewish story. It wasn't because he wanted to promote a Jewish narrative about Harlem, but he's a teacher. He's a scholar who's concerned with the complexity of New York life and American life. He's a seeker of truth to whoever wants to hear it. So consequently, he invited me, and this was the beginning of a friendship. And the friendship grew. I became a fan of his work and ultimately a close friend. And I want to say a word about Willie and his wife, about Helene. When you're invited to their home on Shabbat, and Jeff could confirm or not confirm this, you entered into a very interesting culinary horizon that you're not used to. Maybe it's a function of their Belgian background, but after the main course, before dessert, they would pull out a soup. You had soup on a Shabbos meal. So this gave me some sense of their background, somewhat idiosyncratic, but also very interesting. So look, I became a friend of his. All of my work on orthodoxy, I worked on modern orthodoxy. I ran past Willie for his opinion. And he's seen as the consummate sociologist, but he's also a historian. And one of his, I think 17 or 18 books, will confirm that tonight, was a history of the West Orange community, which had begun in Newark and then moved to West Orange. It's called the Enduring Community. And, you know, he's been known as been a great participant, observer, but he also dug very deeply into archives. And he found a document about how synagogue life was like in Newark in the 1930s, which appears in the book, which I've used in my classes for many, many years. It talks about how Jews should behave in the synagogue. 1930s, don't jiggle your money, don't drive to synagogue. And if don't do these things, because not that they're a violation of halakha, but they're a violation of good taste. So about 10 years ago, I was fortunate enough to speak at the Great Neck Synagogue, and the Helmreichs were there. And I told that story about how he found that document, and he smiled. And you know what? Every time I teach that document, and I teach it almost every semester, I think of Willie, and I'm thankful for that document. And I'm thankful for the fact that not only was he a consummate sociologist and a wonderful friend, but a heck of a historian as well. So those were my initial impressions of Willie. And again, you know, maybe I'll have more things to say about some of the books that he wrote, but he was more than just a sociologist. He's a historian. And at the root of his existence, he was a teacher. He was a teacher in the classroom to all sorts of people. He's a lover of New York and a teacher of our city. And those are the memories of Willie that I'll carry with me forever.
Thank you. So I think Willie he wasn't just a great talker, but he was like an amazing listener. And I think that's really what got so many people to open up to him. Jeff, I wonder if you see that there's in all of these books that he wrote, was there a thread or a common theme that somehow connected them?
Which Jeff?
I'm sorry, I'm looking at you can't tell. Jeff Helmreich, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
I'll be more specific, Jeff Helmreich.
I mean, one of the great things about him was how he did so much. He couldn't really be confined. He was teacher, he was sociologist, he was historian, he was walker, but he was also archivist. And so it's hard to put all his books and works into a box, but they did all involve this attempt of his to capture worlds completely by immersing himself in them, whether in the paper, in the research, or in the people. And his confidence that he could do it. He was planning, even after this, he was going to do Jerusalem. He is going to do a book on Jerusalem. He had plans to cover other cities around the world. And these were all the kinds of things that people had told, including the New York book. No one's ever done, no ethnographer, no urban sociologist has ever captured the whole city. People do parts, they do boroughs, they do neighborhoods, they do corners for 10 years. No one's ever done the whole city this way. And his sense that he could capture whole worlds by immersing himself in them, and by, it was one of these situations where by defying expectations, he recreated them. And this was the same with getting to know the people and disarming the people, whether it was Holocaust survivors, whether it was immigrants in new neighborhoods, whether it was veterans of Newark Jewry or wherever. He would make them feel like they were among somebody, they were with a brother, they were with a cousin, and it didn't matter who they were. And the fact that he dared to think against all rules that he could do that convinced them that he was right, and it worked. And I think this is something that really comes across all of his, pretty much every work that he did. That's the.
I have to say that the range of his topics is breathtaking, ranging from studying Black militants to studying survivors of the Holocaust, rabbis and students in the separatist yeshiva, even editing the letters of an ultra-nationalist who was in an Israeli prison, Ira Rappaport, which was one of
What was the name of that book?
Letters from Telmont Prison.
Thanks, Jeff. Right.
Right. That was a book about.
I don't think Willie shared Rappaport's view of the world, but that's the point. It was totally besides the point. What was important is that all different views of what's going on in Israel, in the world, should be articulated. And through these letters, we're able to get a sense of where Ibra was coming from. And I think that one of the things that he had going for him, how he was able to put his foot in the door in so many different doors, is that he respected the anonymity of his people he studied, with the exception of Rappaport, who gave him entree into his world. Holocaust survivors who didn't want to tell their story are able to tell their story and ultimately want their names known. And ultimately, one of the things about the Against All Odds is that it becomes a document that refutes Holocaust deniers. These are the stories people want to tell. His book on the yeshiva, the world of the yeshiva. There's a great line in the book. I think it comes from Yitz Greenberg, who was the chairman of the Jewish Studies Department at City College at that point. He said to Willie, "I'm not sure why you're writing this book. Are you writing this book because you want to study Gemara, or do you want to study Gemara in order to write this book?" But that was his entree. He could learn. He could be part of that world, and he could assure his subject that they'd get a fair reading of their world. And as a result of that, people who are, in some respects, in the shadows of society, closed cultural environments, attitudes towards life or family have been misunderstood. All these things were important to him, and it comes through in his books, which are accessible, totally accessible, even before, I guess you could say, this magnum opus, this walk through New York. So it was a blessed career based upon the fact that he took the concept of participant observation to the highest level. I'm going to be part of your life. I'm going to write about you with fairness, concretely, and bolster everything that I hear from. I think he interviewed 170 Holocaust survivors and compiled 15,000 pages of notes to buttress what he was saying. That's his methodology. His ultimate methodology was a methodology of trust, getting people to trust him, to tell their stories. People who wouldn't want to tell their stories get a sense to have their stories heard. That was the beauty of his work.
Thanks. Just want to remind viewers to feel free to send us your questions, comments, whatever you'd like to say. I think that book was also really groundbreaking because nobody else, this was years before Spielberg had done his interviews, and nobody else had really sat down with survivors to the extent that he did to do these interviews and pull it together.
Well, I think he comes to it because he can say to people, in some respects, I'm one of you. I'm one of you. And Jeff Helmreich talked about his grandfather and how his grandfather refashions his life in America. So Jeff can correct me if I'm wrong. Some of that he sees in his own experience, he can bring to the table when he studies 170 other people in the book. What do you think, Jeff, on that score?
Yeah, you know, he revered his father for this and for his kind of adventurous, fearless, taking charge of life, despite everything he went through. But he actually set out to write the book thinking. He thought his father was almost a superhero. And you imagine that survivors were superheroes who had somehow used their special talents and their special skills to and ingeniously outwit and outrun the Nazis and to survive in all these great, heroic ways. And that was his sort of very weak hypothesis going in. He just kind of had a guess, and he was going to find out what's this trait that the survivors had. And as he interviewed them, and as he talked to them, and his method is in all his work is the loud listener, uses talking to get others to talk. And as he unearthed their stories and as he unearthed their facts, he discovered, a little bit to his surprise, that wasn't true at all, that there wasn't a surviving trait, that some of them survived by being by being bold. Some of them survived by being, cowardly. Some of them survived by luck. Some of them survived by the luck of others. It was entirely random. There was absolutely nothing they had in common that made them survive. And what turned out to be more inspiring and more interesting about them was how they were able to rebuild with such tenacity and such energy after what they had gone through. And as he put it towards the end of the book, this turned out not to be a book about extraordinary people. It was a book about how extraordinary people can be. And his father was an example of that. But I think so were so many of the others that using the same techniques I described, they came to see him as an intimate.
I love that line you just said about, showing how extraordinary people can be, and hearing you talk about the breadth of topics that he covered in his book. And Sandy, you were talking about how great of a listener he was. That was the kind of thing that I saw right away walking with him, because within a few minutes we had encountered so many different types of people on the street, and I could see this way he had of connecting with them by listening to who they were, showing this genuine curiosity in them. And I just got this sense that he could convey this dignity to people, that by having this person who had just met you, who was so genuinely interested in you and what makes you you and the story of your life, that he was able to make people feel dignified in a way that maybe they don't experience in most of the rest of their life. And I thought that was just an incredible gift that he gave to so many people over the years.
Yeah, it's a great quality. Jeff Helmreich, what about his religious upbringing? And I wonder if his yeshiva studies stayed with him through his life, and if that influenced his outlook.
Certainly, he went to Manhattan Day School. He was not. He was gifted at Gemara, but was otherwise not the most disciplined student. He was restless. He ran around the city, ran around the classroom. He went to Manhattan Day School. He took naturally to Gemara, to Talmud, and he took naturally to singing, to davening. Even throughout his life, he dabbled as a cantor, and he also had a gift for languages. He spoke 6 languages, and I think the authenticity and the rigor of the yeshiva style learning he took with him both into academia and also into, especially some of his earlier works, penetrating the yeshiva world was no mean feat. To do that, you had to convince them that you weren't coming from a secular academic mindset to expose the patriarchy and the primitiveness of yeshiva outlook. At the same time, you were doing an honest and scholarly work. It was in a way it was one of the more remarkable. I mean, he's interviewed Hamas people, he's interviewed militants of various kinds and so on. But in a way, penetrating the yeshiva world in a way that they would trust him and yet reveal things to him that were not trivial, and in some cases that were controversial, I think was an incredible act of discovery. He did it with respect, he did it with fluency, but also with honesty. And I think his upbringing was a crucial part of it. As Jeff Gurock was saying, it's how he got his foot in so many doors. So I think he took a lot of that, both the rigor and the fluency and the authenticity of the Yeshiva world with him, especially in that book, The World of Yeshiva, but throughout a lot of his world capturing.
Let's not forget, before he does The World of the Yeshiva, he publishes a memoir about growing up and his interaction with the yeshiva world as a child. And what is remarkable is that story is accessible not only to Jewish audiences, but it found a general publisher who said, obviously, this is a book which reveals so much, not only about an individual, but about a world that a lot of people don't understand or misunderstand. And that is almost a primer, which leads to the fact that he comes to this yeshiva. He can, the expression, he can talk in Torah, He knows all the code words, and he can be part of that community. At the same time, maintain his scholarly objectivity and write a book that will not defame a yeshiva, but expose their lives to a wider audience. And that's a tremendous achievement when you go into a closed society and you open it up. But look, he had experience. His doctoral dissertation was about a Black militant group. There's a great line in that book. I hope I can find it in my few notes here. There's a fellow named James Reese. All the names were changed to protect the innocent and the non-innocent. He says, "You act a lot like you're Black, and maybe you might be Black for all I know." He had been so much involved with that community. But you come from a white world, and that's the world you live in. But Reese was wrong, because he came from a world in America where he's living in a multiracial environment, which he brings to bear in his work. It's a combination of scholarship, his own experience, and his understanding of the people that he's working with, which makes that, I guess, his first book so revealing and so useful.
What was the title of the first book? Is that the Wake Up, Wake Up?
Yes, right. Wake up to do
the work of the Creator.
Correct. That's correct. Which I guess is the firm version of revelry. Instead of playing the bugle, get up to daven and to see the religious world.
Mm-hmm. Did Willie have a photographic memory?
I would say pretty close to it. Pretty close to it. In fact, people, as he taught about New York City and got more into it, people would meet him and say they're from New York. "Oh, I'm doing a book on New York," or "You did the book." "Oh, I'm from such and such place," and they would mention it, and he would say, "Oh, you're right near that lamp, and next to that mural, and across from where the hill goes up on 178th Street," and it didn't matter what part of New York you're from. He could instantly recall. He could instantly recall quotes that he had read maybe years earlier, and not that this was so relevant in his work, but phone numbers. He never forgot a phone number. So, and yeah, he had some people. I don't know if it was exactly photographic, but it was pretty close to it.
He may have had a photographic memory, but you of course, and I was in his study in your house. I mean, the study was full of documents, full of pages, etc. So it wasn't only my memory that is important, but everything has to be documented and documented carefully. In the book of Walking Through New York City, 4 of the people that he interviewed could really have benefited from the book. And those were the 4 mayors who interviewed. If you want to get a sense of how the people on the ground feel about the traumas of 9/11, about the gentrification of the city, about non-documented people living in the city, all these things which are very current and very important are documented and told in that story. So the book lives on in many respects. And I hope our next mayor will take a look at that book too, because a lot of things that are said here are things that should be discussed by contemporary government and society. So that's another aspect of the book that's so important.
Yeah, those books are like much more than guidebooks. They're really, sociological studies of the city. Matt, people would often ask Willie if he felt safe, walking around as he did. And in fact, in each book, he includes an appendix, about how to stay safe when you're going to do this. I wonder, what's your experience?
Yeah, I think that really gets at the heart of something about walking, which is that you start to realize how much of your thoughts about the city are shaped by what people have told you about it, by stereotypes that exist, narratives that other people have shared with you. And you kind of absorb those things without thinking. We all have different characteristics, different adjectives associated with different parts of the city. And a lot of that is based around fear. I mean, that's one of the most common things how people describe a neighborhood, a good neighborhood, a bad neighborhood, safe, unsafe. And I mean, both he and I, of course, are coming at this from the perspective of a white male. And so, we have a much different feeling of security, I think, than other people might. But for me personally, I grew up in Virginia, and I came to New York in 2005. And so I can remember as an adult going through this process of being afraid of certain areas because of what I was told about them. And I just assumed those things were facts. And then going out and walking there and just meeting person after person after person, and gradually just eroding all of those stereotypes, and realizing the thing that seems incredibly obvious when you state it directly, which is that, the things that separate us as people are minute compared to what we all have in common, just what we want out of life, our family, our careers, all those things that unify essentially everybody who lives in New York. And I think you just kind of absorb those things over the years, and you start to understand that you're not in danger because you're in a particular place. Maybe you could have some street smarts to tell you, oh, this person's acting a little weird. Let me watch out now. But this idea that there's a line you cross where all of a sudden you're unsafe is just kind of a ridiculous idea. And I think, walking thousands and thousands of miles just really grinds that into you. And, I just remember one of the things that most directly spoke to me that Bill said to me, because it was something I had thought and I had never articulated to him, but just in one of our walks around, he started talking about how for him, kind of the core value of what his walk was, or the core thing he was experiencing was freedom. And I know that's a very vague term, and I think he meant it in a lot of different ways. Freedom from just having a boss telling you what to do. You can go out and truly let your curiosity guide you through the city and tell you what's important to look at, and you're really completely self-directed. But I think a big part of it also is just freedom from other people's ideas and stories about places. You're out there yourself in a situation, immersed in it. We were talking a lot before about how he would immerse himself in all these different worlds to write these books. And I think it was the same thing with walking. You're really able to be there and just build your experiences into your own theories about the city. You're not taking other people's words for things. You're really out there just seeing it for yourself. And I think that's a really tremendous form of freedom that you can afford yourself. And that really goes back to that idea of being scared or not. You're just out there trying to connect with people. And I think that just teaches you so much more than you can even state in words.
Jeff Helmreich, was he able to bring all these different worlds that he inhabited together, or were they kind of separate worlds in his life and in your lives?
Yeah. I think he enjoyed the ability to jump between them as if the others didn't exist. When he was talking to you, you were the only thing in the world. When he was talking to somebody to be passed on the street, or so, when he was in a certain neighborhood, not only was that neighborhood or that world the only thing that existed for him, but he himself became of that place and of that scene, almost to the exclusion of whatever else might have been true about it. I think he liked the ability to anonymously blend and penetrate new places. When he was Walker Willie, you might say, he for those moments he wasn't Professor Willie, he wasn't Yeshiva expert Willie, he wasn't sort of the expert on racial and ethnic stereotypes. Well, he was at that point, he was just this neighborhood. He was the denizen or the intimate companion with whoever he was talking to. And I think he liked being so many different seemingly incompatible things. And he liked keeping them a little bit incompatible. He liked the fact that he could jump between different worlds and dimensions. I don't think that that he ever really tried to combine it all or synthesize it all. He much more preferred the role of something closer to chameleon. He would just be all to all. And it's interesting because everybody from these different worlds that got to know him, even just for a minute, they all described the same person. He actually was the same, exactly as you and Matt had put it. This incredible, boundless heart, this open, loving, intimate, familiar, friendly, wide-eyed, curiously listening person. But nevertheless, he kept the worlds in many ways independent. And we only really found out how many of them there were afterwards.
There's one other piece to his life that we haven't discussed that needs to be mentioned, and that is his involvement with the Jewish community, apart from being a scholar. Whether it's the local day school that he was instrumental in its founding and growth. I know that's part of his background. The Israeli Day Parade that he was deeply involved in, things of that sort, his work in conjunction with Jewish Community Relations Council. So that's a different hat, different yarmulke that he put on when he dealt with the Jewish community. And again, sometimes critical, always involved, always discerning in his attitudes. So let's add that to his CV in terms of his attitude. And by the way, as far as being afraid, we once had a conversation about the fact he was a pretty tough kid growing up. He had his share of street fights that I did too in changing neighborhoods. So he was resolute as far as that's concerned, and that I'm sure that helped him in his walks.
Someone is asking if anybody remembers a story about Willie interviewing Elie Wiesel at City College. Someone said there's a great story about that moment.
I don't know.
No, Jeff?
Sorry. I know they were close. They were very close.
And Matt, a question for you is like, how much more walking do you plan to do, and when do you think you'll finish New York City?
So yeah, I've walked, I don't know, 98%, something very close to the end. But what's happened over the years is that there are lots of neighborhoods that I've finished walking, and now there's a new street built there, a new park, a new pathway. In the way that Bill was so obsessive about documenting, the people that he met, the backgrounds of the people, the interactions he had with them. My version of that is just being really obsessive about my map and pathways and shorelines and all kinds of stuff. So a lot of what's left is just, small amounts, a few blocks here, a few blocks there, scattered all over the city. So I don't know exactly how much more distance that is or how long it will take. But it'll be done when it's done, and then I guess it still won't be because there will have been something else that was just built. So probably every year for the rest of my life, I'll just have to keep going back and touching up the map.
May I ask Matt a quick question?
Please.
So I have given tours over the years of the Lower East Side, and due to the pandemic, I didn't do these tours, and I came back to do these tours, and so much had changed in just 18 to 24 months. So every time you do this sort of thing, this is a city that's constantly reinventing itself, not only in terms of gentrification, but iconic buildings that you once wanted to show people are now empty lots, or a great synagogue is now a high-rise apartment. So must be constant revising your understanding of what a particular block is, particular section of the city is over the course of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, I guess a core part of this walk is kind of letting go of that idea that I'm going to be able to understand a single place because of how much it changes over time and the specificity of my experience, at the moment I'm there. And it's, like you said, I mean, the city itself is changing on a physical level and a cultural level, but there's so many factors that go into what you experience when you're walking. I mean, just the weather, the way the light is, what's going on in your personal life is affecting your mind, which affects, what you're observing. The people who just happen to be on the block with you, it could be the friendliest person in the world or the grumpiest person, and that can kind of change your day in a certain direction. And so, yeah, I feel like, every moment of the walk is unique and probably different than, if I had woken up an hour later and started my walk an hour later, it could have been a completely different day, even without the larger scale changes of the city. So yeah, I think it's almost just like, drawing one single infinitesimally small line across this, gigantic space-time continuum. And, paying as close attention as you can to that line that you're on, while also understanding that you're kind of this little speck in the magnitude of the whole city.
Mhm. So I thought this is,
Really?
go ahead. Go ahead,
Oh,
Jeff.
my mother just sent me the Elie Wiesel story.
Oh, great.
So Elie Wiesel was involved was helping advise City College on hiring. So he was his teacher. And he was teaching the Jewish Studies department at City University. And my father had initially applied for a job which included teaching Jewish Studies. And Elie Wiesel looked at his CV and said, You've written on African Americans, Black militants. From where are you going to do Jewish Studies? And my father said, characteristically, he said, if I could really penetrate that world, if I could study Black militants in that way, how much better do you think I can do in my own community? And with that, he was hired. So that was basically that was that was the Elie Wiesel question. So anyway, fair.
So we're starting to run out of time. I was going to read something from the latest book, which was published posthumously, is The Queens Nobody Knows. But there's and you just open it and there are wonderful things, but there's one particularly wonderful story that you might want to look up that involves Madonna, a synagogue in Corona that had become somebody's home. Willie's walking down the streets and sort of notices a building that looks like a shul. It had been a shul. Of course, it knocks on the door, it talks to the people, and within minutes, he gets invited in. And it's now this Indian couple who are living there, and they show him around the house. And it turns out, tells the story of how Madonna had lived in this house when she first moved to New York. He goes upstairs, he finds, all kinds of synagogue artifacts, in the rooms, in the bedrooms. There's an Aron Kodesh in the bedroom. And it's just sort of trademark Willie to sort of find these things that nobody really knew existed. And then he asks the man who lives there, like, well, why did you keep all this stuff? And the man says, I don't know for sure, but I guess I just felt that for the sake of history and posterity, it should just stay there. That's why I love the house. And it just, those few pages bring together so much from this one block in Corona. So this has been really great. And it's really nice that we have these moments to remember Willie, who was just such a really great man. I want to thank our really exceptional panelists. Thanks for your stories and your candor. Thanks again to the Center for Jewish History and the Jewish Week. And thanks to everyone for joining us. You can find Willie's books and Jeffrey Gurock's books at bookstores and online. And you can learn more about Matt's project at imjustwalking.com and really try to see the film The World Before Your Feet, which was directed by Jesse Eisenberg. So there is another volume coming, and that's called The Bronx Nobody Knows, which is in production now. I really look forward to seeing that. And some people have asked about donations. If anybody would like to make a contribution in Willie's memory, the Helmreich family suggests Met Council, which is America's largest Jewish charity dedicated to serving the needy. And you can find the information at metcouncil.org. I was just also looking at some comments that people had made to the obituary that ran in the New York Times. It was a beautiful piece by Joseph Berger. And somebody said that a New York City street should be named in Willie's honor. And I think that's really an excellent idea if we can somehow make that happen. So really, thank you. I want to wish you all a very happy Hanukkah. And I hope that we can all take away some of Willie's great light. So thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.